Now, Tony Khan hosted a Final Battle media call on Wednesday, and he spoke publicly for the first time about William Regal leaving AEW and confirming that he will be returning to WWE. Regal is going to be starting his new position with WWE the first week of the new year. This is what we know, right? PW Insider was the first to report that. He'll be starting with them the first week of January. It's going to be a behind-the-scenes coaching role. He will not have an on-camera role, since that was one of the conditions of his release, that he not be allowed to appear on television at least for the next year. And he is also ending his podcast that he started earlier this year. So that podcast is no more, at least with him on there. That podcast is no more. Before I did the show last week, I saw what EC3 said about Regal. And that when he went over to AEW, the quote-unquote word was, I immediately regret this decision, and there's very much a maturity issue here within management. I'm sorry, I'm going to need more than EC3 on a podcast with Vince Russo to give me the scoop on what is going on in the mind of William Regal. So I didn't mention it. Justin LaBar of Wrestling Inc. then tweeted last Sunday, what I'm picking up is Regal is done with AEW, back to WWE soon. Close with Triple H, but also his wisdom and coaching not appreciated or received the way that you would think by some in the AEW locker room who feel they have six-figure multi-year deals and Regal's advice is behind the times or beneath them. So that was LaBar talking about what his kind of view of the situation was. Brian Pillman Jr., who works for AEW, chimed in on the thread and said, this is not entirely true. There are several of us, myself included, who spent multiple hours before TV working with Regal and learning from him. Should there have been more? Maybe. But he and Danielson always had a solid audience around the ring before TV. LaBar then said, Brian, I'm glad you're speaking out because the biggest thing of what I said is some. If you or any others were picking his brain, good on you and best of luck. And Pillman responded, I know you said some, I just didn't want the narrative to be that he was just standing there preaching to the air. Some days there would be 10 guys out there soaking it all in. Some days it would just be me and Wheeler and Lee. I didn't mind when his attention wasn't spread as thin. So context is important here, because to hear others talk about it, you would think that Regal was just standing there talking to himself and pulling a Bray Wyatt. There were people that took his advice and listened to him. Now, I can believe that there are others there, bigger stars than Brian Pillman Jr., who think that they don't need to take advice from anybody. They think that their shit doesn't stink and it smells like lavender. Hangman Page made that stupid comment over the summer about feeling like he doesn't need to take advice, that he was part of a movement that created this entire company and I was a world champion, so I don't know that I need to take advice from veterans that work, behind the scenes. He said he takes more pride in the trial and error of trying things on his own to see what works and what doesn't. And hey, that's fine. But it was also a very stupid, tone-deaf thing for him to say. So I don't doubt that there may be some of that going on in AEW, but we had BJ Bethel on SEScoops.com said that he spoke with a source who refuted the claims made by EC3, who described them as completely inaccurate. He said, I can't believe this. This is what the source told him. I can't believe this is a story. It's complete bullshit. There was never some schedule that you had to be down at the ring and people blew it off. And Regal was never going to flat out tell someone that they had to come to the ring so he could coach them. Regal would work with somebody, people would go down and show up. A lot of people took advantage of it. Other vets do it all the time. It's always the younger women and men. Sometimes someone would work with somebody one-on-one. Other times there would be quite a few people down there. It was totally informal. And then another source said Regal would even sit in the stands sometimes with guys and talk about the fans' point of view, or the point of view of watching on TV. He would tell you about making sure to know how you are looking at the fans when you come to the ring, or how you would look on TV. He said, make sure you always are really nice to the camera guys. They're the ones who make you look good. So that's the other side of the story, which I think is important to get out there. What Regal thought of Tony Khan and AEW management, only he knows. But Tony Khan was very accommodating when it came to his request to leave. And he revealed that his mother, Tony Khan's mother, suffered a stroke a few days before the Grand Slam show in September. which made that period even more stressful for him because it was coming off the fallout from the Brawl Out scrum and all the creative plans that had to be changed as a result. CM Punk got hurt, he went away, the Elite were suspended, everything had to change, right? So then his mother suffered a second stroke and needed an operation for a spot that they found on her heart, which if not fixed, could cause more strokes in the future. And he was at home celebrating his 40th birthday with his parents when he got a phone call from their chief legal officer that Regal had approached her about wanting to leave the company. And the reason he gave was that he has a son, which is Charlie Dempsey, who works in NXT, who, if you saw him, you would know right away that was William Regal's son. There's no doubt. There's no doubt where that DNA comes from. And he wanted to be there to help in his development. And his contract gave AEW the right to pick up the option to renew at the end of the year, and he asked them, please don't renew it. So Tony said he really had to think about it because Regal was an important part of their storylines. And he spoke to Regal on the phone. He was sitting on a park bench outside the Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville while his mother was sleeping inside. And he said that he had a really good, conversation with him. He said Regal had really good intentions for wanting to go back and be with his son. And in that moment, with his own mother going through what she was going through, he didn't want to be the one to stand between him and his son. In October, he sat down with Regal in Jacksonville. He sat down for 90 minutes after Rampage. They did a Rampage show in Jacksonville. And he said that he would make some sacrifices to give Regal what he wanted. He said Regal is still with them through the holidays. He's not officially gone yet. And that he will not be able to facilitate every family reunion, but AEW is a family-first company, and he wanted to make this work. And then later on, when he was asked about people like Malachi Black and Andrade and Buddy Matthews, who have wives and girlfriends working in WWE, would you allow any of them to go back if they asked? He said those are different situations, because with Regal, he's not going to be allowed to appear on television. Obviously, if any of those guys went back to WWE, they're not going back as a coach, they would be going back as talent. So yes, those are very different situations. Now, as far as Tony Khan's mother is concerned, she seems to be doing better. That's very good to hear. Tony Khan and I are the same age. His birthday is 4 days after mine. And anybody who's listened to this podcast for a long period of time, you know the situation with my mother. I documented it here on the podcast as it was happening. And I lost my mom. It's going to be 5 years in March, which I can't believe, but I have a lot of sympathy and empathy, for what he probably was going through and how stressful of an experience that was. It sucks. I don't wish that on anybody. And obviously nobody knew what was going on because he kept that very close to the vest. So it sucks that she got sick. It's good that she seems to be doing better. But I can sympathize. I can understand with him being in a situation where he had all of this shit going on back in September. Right, and couldn't talk about any of it, and was trying to sort through all of that and figure out new creative directions because he lost 4 of his top stars in one fell swoop. Punk, Nick Jackson, Matt Jackson, Kenny Omega all went away when he had big plans for them heading into Full Gear. So it's a terrible situation for anybody to be in. I'm sure some people listening to this right now have been down that same road, but thankfully she seems to be doing better. But it hit home for me in a way that maybe it didn't for most, just because I've been there myself, and being the same age as him, and there's a lot of similarities there, and it sucks, but thankfully she's doing better. Now, last Sunday, I mentioned Regal's son on the podcast, and I mentioned family as being one of the reasons why I think Regal may have wanted to go back to WWE, and now we come to find out that's exactly what he told Tony Khan. Now, did he have other reasons? Is he lying? Did he have other intentions? I don't know. It's possible. He probably did. I think the moment Triple H took over for Vince McMahon, he was probably thinking about going back. I don't know if he had his mind made up, but when Triple H took over as the head of creative and Vince McMahon went away, I'm sure that that's exactly what Regal was thinking in his mind, about going back to work for Triple H. Which is probably where he thought he would always be until the day he retired or the day he died, is doing what he was doing in NXT and working for Triple H, who's one of his best friends. Those two have been close for a very long time. And I said I could see Regal going back to WWE and being to Triple H what Pat Patterson was to Vince McMahon, his right-hand man. As things stand, it's a conditional release. The compromise was that he can coach, but he cannot appear on television for the next year, which would mean no War Games proclamations from him for Survivor Series next year if they bring back the War Games matches. Speaking of War Games, Tony said that he was surprised by Triple H's War Games tweet, which was a video compilation of all the times Regal said War Games on NXT. And he didn't feel it was in the spirit of AEW accommodating Regal's request. He shouldn't be surprised. I don't know why he is. WWE does not care about Tony Khan's feelings. They have shown that before, time and time again. WWE does not care about your feelings. I know he takes these things very personally. I wish he wouldn't. But it's what they do. He was angry about them running 2 shows the same weekend as All Out. He took that as a personal offense. He should have expected it. I don't know why he continues to be surprised by these things. And also, the reality is, it was old footage that they owned. It was a tweet that Triple H put up. It wasn't even that nefarious. Did he have other intentions in doing it? Yes, I'm sure he did. But it was old footage that they owned. They can do whatever they want with it. On Dynamite, they tried to tie things up in a bow as neatly as possible by having William Regal explain his rationale for doing what he did. Why did he do what he did when he turned on Jon Moxley at Full Gear? Tony Schiavone was in the ring. There was a tag team match with Claudio and Wheeler Yuta against Daniel Garcia and Jake Hager. And after the match, Tony got in the ring and he said, I have something I want to show you guys. Because he had all the members, the remaining members of the Blackpool Combat Club were in the ring. Moxley was there, Claudio was there, Wheeler was there. And he said, look, I've been friends with William Regal for over 25 years. He's a dear personal friend of mine. And I had an opportunity to do an interview with him a few weeks ago. And I think you guys ought to see what we recorded. Now, this was after Full Gear, but before MJF bashed him in the back of the head with the brass knucks, right? So before they did the injury angle with Regal, Regal had a sense, he had a premonition that something bad might happen. And he wanted to take the time to explain things before anything bad happened. He said, people will only see this interview if something bad happens to me, and you're always expecting something bad to happen. He took exception to what MJF did to Tony Schiavone when he put his hands on him a few months ago. And, he's been going around angry about old emails and stuff. So he gave MJF what he wanted. Now he's the world champion, but now everybody is going to be chasing after him. He's got a target on his back. And he realized several months ago that the 3 main members of the Blackpool Combat Club, Bryan Danielson was not there on Wednesday. They said he was at the hospital with Regal. But he said in this interview here that the 3 main members of the Blackpool Combat Club, that being Moxley, Danielson, and Claudio, he realized that they don't need him around anymore. But he also knew that if he wanted to leave, they wouldn't let him go. He needed to show them why they don't need him and why they can teach young Wheeler to be the best in the world. He said, you have to lead by example, though. Hopefully Jon Moxley understands, since he's a calculating man like him, the reason he did what he did at Full Gear was to teach the final thing he could ever teach, which is always stay one step ahead and always keep eyes in the back of your head. And then he said he is Blackpool Combat Club until the day he dies. It was Regal's choice to leave AEW. Tony Khan gave him what he wanted. He tried to come up with some sort of explanation for things to tie things up on his way out. I thought it was as good as could be expected, the circumstances being what they were. Was it a great explanation? No. Did William Regal, to teach them a lesson, have to cost Jon Moxley the championship? No. And Jon Moxley looked confused in the ring after hearing this explanation, and then he just quickly moved on from it. But I at least appreciate them trying to tie up loose ends. I'm not going to beat him up over this. Regal put everybody over that he could on the way out. He put over MJF, and he did the injury angle. He laid down for him. He went out on a stretcher. He put over the Blackpool Combat Club right down to Wheeler Yuta. And I'm going to miss seeing him on television now for the next year. One thing I do agree with that EC3 said is that Regal is too valuable not to be in a developmental system. He never should have been fired from that developmental system in the first place. Moxley, by the way, he worked that show on Wednesday sick. He and Renee both were very sick. She missed the show on Wednesday. He flew in for it, though, because he knew they needed him for the Regal stuff. On his birthday, no less. Wednesday was his 37th birthday. And when he got there, they asked him to work a match against Konosuke Takeshita for the Rampage taping, which I watched. That match was better than anything on SmackDown this week. I have yet to see a bad Takeshita match. He is a tremendous talent. I hope AEW realizes they have something very special in him. But that was a very good match on Friday night. But Jon Moxley, putting in the work. Another reason why he is the MVP of this company in 2022.